All right, so we have a full audience here of JCP community fans. I feel like it's. I know most of you already, so thanks for welcoming me here to JDKIO. I am going to talk to you today about the JCP, Java, and Adopt a JSR. So in case you haven't met me yet, my name is Heather VanCura, and I'm the chair of the Java Community Process Program. I'm also a leader of the global adoption programs around Java, and particularly JSRs, clearly, and OpenJDK. I'm a longtime fan of open source technologies, and it's actually the reason I got involved with Java technology many years ago when I joined Sun Microsystems. I've been working on Java ever since the maintenance release of Java 1.2, so clearly I'm passionate about Java, and the community specifically is really what's kept me involved in evolving different roles over time, but always with the Java community. And my personal interests regarding fun are traveling to new places, meeting new people. This is actually my 7th European stop over the last 2.5 weeks, so I'll be going back home to California tomorrow. But I've had a great time visiting and meeting with Java developers over the last few weeks. And I'm fortunate to be able to continue to do this in my role as an international speaker and engaging with the Java community all around the world. But I do currently reside in the Bay Area of California, although I'm originally from Southern California, so I particularly enjoy beach venues if any of you want to invite me to your next Java developer conference at the beach. So that's me. All right, so you may or may not be aware that last month Java actually celebrated 22 years of existence, and in that context I of course bring up the TIOBE index because of course in the developer press you always hear the news that Java's dead or dying or is going away very soon. Being that I've worked in the community for now close to 17 years. I can say that they've been saying that for a very long time. But clearly Java continues to be number one, and I started to think about why that is. Clearly it's grown in terms of, since it started in the early days to be targeted at set-top boxes, it's grown to target multiple kinds of devices. It's used in virtually everything that you touch these days, from cars to financial systems, travel systems, very small embedded devices. And in that regard, what is it that makes it so special? What makes Java so special? What has it made it so ubiquitous in our society? And I brought it down to really 3 things, and this just kind of sets the context for what I want to talk to you about today in terms of the JCP and the role that it plays in the Java developer community. First of all, of course, Java is built from the ground up to be secure, but also it's scalable. And it goes all the way from the very small devices, Java cards, all the way up to the high-end servers. And that end-to-end story is really something I think that is unique about Java, though certain developers target usually one particular use case. It's unique in that it does scale all the way from the very small to the large devices. And secondly, the promise of compatibility, backwards compatibility, that's always been vital and one of the key tenets of Java, that we continue to ensure that compatibility so that we prevent vendor lock-in and that we provide developers with choice. But the third thing that I feel is the most important and really sets the context for what I want to talk to you about in terms of the community and how you can participate is the way that Java is developed. And again, as I mentioned, that's really what drew me to Java in the beginning, was the way that Java is developed through the Java community process, and that is collaboratively with the community, with Java developers all around the world. There really is no other technology that is developed in quite this way through the JCP, and I know at this conference we've heard from several different spec leads and community members engaged in JSR standardization activities through the JCP, so you've heard quite a bit about this over the last couple of days. So I believe the community is the most important reason, and that's why we continue to see growth of Java, why it is the #1 development platform, why we have 10 million Java developers all around the world, and why it's running on not just one type of a device, but billions of devices all around the world, many different types of devices. And that is because we do have some philosophies around Java that we consider important in terms of the quality, the security, modernizing for new standards to keep pace with other technologies, ensuring that compatibility, again, and productivity for developers. But most key is the active ecosystem involvement, and that's a key part of my job as the chair of the Java community process. So I believe most of you already know what the JCP is, but I will share just a 10-minute primer on the JCP, and then I'll get into the main points of my talk, which are really what's currently being developed through the JCP, what technologies are coming out. Particularly this summer is a major summer for Java because we have 2 major platform releases planned to come out this summer, which is unique. Usually they're spaced out about a year apart. So I'll talk to you about the technology that's being developed, how we're evolving the JCP overall, and thirdly, how you can get involved through the community, essentially through the Adopt A JSR program. So the JCP, everyone probably has heard, if you've been around the community at any point in time, and you don't even have to be around very long to hear JSR this, JSR that, and then numbers follow, usually without any names. So that's really the main focus of the JCP, is developing Java through JSRs. Everything in the Java X namespace has a JSR associated with it. And at this point, we have close to 400 JSRs, so that can get a little bit overwhelming. And part of my talk today will help guide you maybe towards some of the most pertinent and relevant that are being developed currently through the JCP. But a JSR is actually led by the community. So JCP members, any member can lead a JSR. And the task of that spec lead, leading a JSR, is to form an expert group. So a community of experts to work together to help them deliver the work of the JSR. Like, for example, our last talk that we just had here was Antoine from the CDI JSR. He's the spec lead, but he also has a team of experts helping him to complete the work of that JSR and ensure that it's not just what Antoine or his community of peers thinks should go into the spec, but we have a representation of how developers are using the technology and what they're looking for in the future. But ultimately, the spec lead is responsible for completing the work, and not only is it about the specification, as the name implies, Java specification request, but the spec, the RI, so the reference implementation, which is the actual code, and the TCK. So the TCK is essential because it ensures that vibrant ecosystem that we have with Java. And I put together a little graphic that shows how those 3 things work together. And again, the community being able to create multiple implementation is really enabled by this 3 deliverable process. So we have the spec, the RI, and the TCK. But you may or may not be aware that the reference implementation for the JSR is just one implementation of that specification. The community can develop compatible implementations to give developers choice in terms of which implementation they want to use. But that also provides vendors and companies with an opportunity to create products that they can take to market. So they can take their own reference implementation out to market. And as long as it passes the TCK, they can promote themselves as being a compatible implementation of this Java standard. So I'll show you a couple of examples of how that works, but I think that really is a key part of the JCP in enabling the entire ecosystem around Java, not just the JSRs and the reference implementations, but allowing other people to have their implementations and grow the ecosystem overall. Every JSR not only has to deliver those 3 things in the end, but also go through formal review periods that are approved by our JCP Executive Committee. So what that means for you as developers is that you have opportunities throughout the life cycle to give your feedback and input and comment on things like the specification and the reference implementation as they're being developed. Not having to wait until it's released in a product in the end after a year or more of development, but you have an opportunity from the very beginning to provide your use cases and examples in the beginning, and of course as we get further on to provide comments on how things have been implemented. And that's all done the same way for every JSR, whether it's led by Oracle or another community member, all follows the same process, and every JSR must be approved by the executive committee before it can be marked as final. The organization is structured in this way, such that we have an executive committee who is responsible for overseeing the organization itself from a governance perspective, as well as voting on all of the JSRs that are developed. As I mentioned earlier, the main work of the JCP really happens in the JSR expert groups. So those are an essential part of the JCP, made up of the community membership. So every JSR has a spec lead, and every JSR has an expert group. So sitting at the table with the spec lead are the expert group members. But again, the key vital part of the success of this effort is that we have the Java developer community actually participating and giving feedback to those expert groups. So they're not working in isolation as experts architecting for something maybe that doesn't exist in the real world. So you have a key role to play here in terms of giving your feedback and advice to these expert groups as they developed. And we've organized and structured the JCP such that we're trying to make it easier for you, enable transparency, broaden participation to make it easy to get that process started for you. And later in the talk, I'll show you exactly how you can do it step by step. Over the years, we have changed the organization such that it's not only corporations participating in the JCP. So oftentimes, the community now starts to think that the JCP is all about the companies and the vendors trying to get what they want. But in fact, we've evolved the JCP so that now our membership is primarily made up of individual Java developers. Actually, 3/4 of our membership is made up of individual Java developers. And when I first started working in the JCP, it was exactly the opposite. It was primarily companies, and we had just a handful of individuals who were participating. And at the same time, we expanded so that Java user groups can participate in the JCP and continued to enable the participation of open source groups such as Eclipse and the Apache Software Foundation. So now we have JUGs participating from all around the world, and that really has given us an avenue towards getting the word out to more Java developers. So we have close to 500 Java user groups who are meeting all around the world, usually monthly, happening in every part of the world: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia. I haven't heard of one in Antarctica yet, but we've got the 6 continents covered there. So getting the word out to the Java user group leaders and sharing with them how they can participate and what's coming next is a way for us to ensure that we really get the word out to the majority of developers, and not just in one part of the world where maybe the spec leads are situated, but all around the world. The executive committee also, we strive to have diverse representation there in the executive committee, in that we've expanded from not just having corporations, but also representation from end user companies like Twitter, and banks such as Credit Suisse participating on the executive committee. So the executive committee, we meet once a month. And we've also expanded to have Java user groups. So it's really important to have a couple of those key Java user groups representing, as well as individual Java developers. And these executive committee members are elected every year by the JCP membership. So every fall we have the elections, and every fall we have some members coming, some members going. This is our last face-to-face meeting in Austin, Texas, which was in May, just last month. We met in Austin, Texas, so that's cool. And as I mentioned, open standards are important, open source as well, and some people say it's one or the other, but in the JCP, we firmly believe that we need both. So 10 years ago, when Java was released under open source license, there was talk of maybe we don't need standards anymore. But I think it's pretty well agreed upon by this point that open source is an important requirement, and that is the de facto development model, but standards are important too. And what we've agreed upon in the JCP is that we will standardize together and cooperate, whether that's individual developers, open source groups, or competing vendors. They'll agree and come together and work together to standardize, but then compete on the implementations. So that's what I talked about earlier. You can have multiple implementations of every standard. And open standards implemented in open source make it easier for developers to understand the technology, and it also increases the adoption of the standard, and that you can actually start to use the technology before it's released final. And what we've also seen over time is that it's less about starting a JSR because you think a certain area needs to be standardized. So something like configuration, for example, has been talked about for a couple of years in terms of, do we want to standardize in that area? Where when we first started and things were in closed source, probably a JSR would have been started maybe 2-3 years ago, where now it's more important that experience is gained in open source community, and then you agree together and have enough commonality that you decide to standardize on it later. So rather than starting with the specification and the documentation, you're starting with the code, with the reference implementation in an open source project. So open source has played a key role in the evolution of the JCP. And to give you just a little bit of a concrete example of what some of these things look like in terms of open source implementations of technologies developed through the JCP, the Java platforms are all developed through the JCP. So Java SE and Java EE are developed collaboratively and released under open source licenses, but the RI part is actually done in an open source project. So one of those three main deliverables, the spec, the RI, and the TCK, the RIs are developed in open source. So for Java SE, the open source project is Open JDK, and for Java EE, the open source project for the reference implementation is Project Glassfish. So all of the JSRs under Java EE feed up together for the reference implementation. So that concludes my primer of what is the JCP. So the focus I'll move towards now is talking about the new revisions of the three platforms, the most recent revisions of the three platforms. The 2 platform releases that are coming out later this summer are reforms to the JCP itself, so reforming the organization structure, and the increased participation from the community and how you can get involved and start to participate and get more active in the ecosystem itself. So Java ME, as I mentioned earlier on, Java still is an end-to-end story, and even on the executive committee, we still have some embedded vendors that are actively interested in continuing to evolve the Java ME technology. So actually the last release we've had of Java ME was in April 2014, which was a release following 5 years of inactivity on the Java ME front. And this Java ME technology is really focused for the embedded market. So we introduced the Java ME embedded profile. So vendors on the EC, for example, that are interested in this technology are people like Microdoc and Gemalto and V2Com. So really more the Internet of Things space, connecting things to the cloud. And we're currently talking in the JCP Executive Committee how those members can continue to evolve this moving forward. But the last final release developed through the JCP with JSRs was in 2014. Secondly, the second platform, Java EE7, was released in 2013, so 4 years ago now at this point, which seems like a long time ago. But as you've heard in some of the talks earlier today, already working on Java EE8, which is currently scheduled to release later this summer. But to give you an example of what Java EE looks like from a JSR perspective, this is a nice visual because it shows you that, yes, Java EE is a JSR developed through the JCP, but then there are the individual components that make up all the parts of Java EE, and each one has its own JSR, for example, CDI, Servlet, JAX-RS, and on the right-hand side are the new technologies that were introduced in Java EE7. So the ones on the left were revisions of existing technologies that had already been incorporated in a previous Java EE platform release. But every release we try to introduce some new functionality to the platform itself. So for EE7, we introduced 3 new technologies new to Java EE: batch application processing, an API for JSON, and an API for WebSocket. So that was new for Java EE7. If you're involved in the EE community, you probably noticed that the adoption for Java EE7, I would say, is a little bit slow, maybe compared to previous Java EE releases. But I'm really pleased to share that in especially last year, we've really seen all of the Java EE application servers come and get certified to be compatible. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of the JCP and the model that we use, enabling a broader and more diverse ecosystem. So the Java EE compatible application servers, these are all choices of implementations of the Java EE7 platform. So it was released with a spec with a reference implementation, which is Glassfish, which you can see there. But all of these other vendors and companies and open source projects have also certified as compatible application servers. So these are all choices for you as developers, and user groups have continued to get involved with this through Adopt A JSR. Multiple publications have been written to inform and educate the community of developers, and it has continued to drive the evolution of the platform itself. So Java EE8 is moving forward, actually almost finished. Many of the specs are already finished, have gone to final release, and many are just now finishing up. I would say probably half of them have already gone to final release. And the others are in the very final stages. So this is Java EE8 is set to be released later this summer. The new technologies are on the bottom in this chart. So the new technologies to Java EE8 in terms of their new JSRs are a JSON bindings JSR and a security JSR. So that's new for Java EE. It's always had security as part of it, but it's new to call out this particular aspect of Java EE. So those are the new JSRs, new functionality added to Java EE, and then updates to existing technologies such as JAX-RS, JSF Servlet, Bean Validation, and CDI, which was the previous talk that we had here. Now, of course, it will take time for these compatible implementations to come forward, so the fact that these are final shouldn't mean that, oh, now it's too late for me to get involved. Actually, a great way to get involved is to start looking at the reference implementations now, providing feedback on any last-minute bug fixes, and starting to learn and use it, because it may take a couple of years for the community to catch up and have all those applications ready for you to use in production, but it's a great time for you to get the lead on being a expert, particularly, in what's new in any of these technologies that are particularly interesting to you. So that's Java EE. The third platform is Java SE, of course, the main standard platform of the JDK. So Java SE8, clearly March 2014 was released. Java 8 was, I would say, the most successful Java release ever in terms of fast adoption, so kind of the opposite of the last EE release. When I go out to do these user group talks and conferences and ask people who's using Java 8, almost immediately, almost everyone in the audience had at least tried it out in development, maybe not in production. But clearly Java 8 was different and unique in the fact that it had some sexy new features that developers have been asking about for a really long time. So I think that's part of it in terms of introducing lambdas, a new streams API, a new date and time API. But what's unique about the new date and time API is that it actually came from the community. It started as an open source project within the community from an individual in the London Java community, actually starting it with an open source project, JDK. So I think the fact that a lot of things came from the community in terms of what went into Java SE8, but also the fact that the community was involved in a testing effort with Java 8 and really made it a solid release, which contributed to the very quick adoption of Java 8. And obviously, as I have here a few articles in terms of the excitement surrounding that release. So that's just kind of a step into what's coming next. So oftentimes one of the biggest questions I get is, well, aren't you worried that Java 9 isn't going to have as great of adoption as Java 8? Well, I think we all know that it won't be as quickly as adopted and as exciting for developers as Java 8. I would say, being that I've worked with so many Java releases, it was the most exciting Java release ever. So I think it's expected it won't be as exciting, but it is a big step forward for the platform. So Java 9 is currently in development through the JCP and OpenJDK as well. It's targeted to release currently in September, so towards the end of the summer. Lots of different things going into Java 9, but everyone, I think, is aware that the big thing is Project Jigsaw, so introducing modularity into the platform. And we've tried to build on the success that we had with the testing of Java 8 as well, in terms of ensuring that we have regular builds available so that you can download that and try it out, test your applications against it, as well as do some quality outreach to the open source projects to ensure that they're ready for Java 9 as well. So currently, the link where you can get that is the jdk.java.net.9/9, and currently we're up at build 173. But as I mentioned, Java 9 isn't only about modularity. There's some other cool things in it, which you might want to check out. Some of the most popular features with developers are JShell and the Java linker. But it's clearly a big project that we've been working on for a really long time. And I think the important thing to note about Java 9 as well is that it sets us up for other things in the future. So one of the things that has been talked about in the mailing list, and we're also working in the executive committee to ensure works smoothly, is the fact that we want to start moving to a faster release cycle. So the changes that we're introducing with Java 9, which are currently in public review, that is where the JSRs now are for Java 9, and reconsideration ballot now with the executive committee. So moving forward, we want to have yearly releases of Java for the Java SE platform. So that's what part of the reason also I share a little bit of history for you, so you can see in between releases we're talking about multiple years, right? Well, obviously we want to be able to keep pace with other languages and technologies that are coming up. So one of the things that we want to do is move to a faster release cycle. So maybe 12 months to start. So beyond Java 9, these are some of the things that we're looking at for including in future Java releases, but you probably won't see any more releases tied to numbers. So you won't say like, oh, Java 10's Project Valhalla, right? It will be more like a cycle where it's the release is this date, and we're continuing to work on things. And these are some of the things that are already being worked on in OpenJDK and that you look for in the future. But the things that we're doing with Java 9 really enable this kind of a move to happen in the future. So that's my section on technologies that are being developed through the JCP. My second section will be talking about how we've evolved the JCP organizationally to adapt to the needs of developers. So I'll share a few things that we've worked on with the executive committee to roll out to the community about that before I move on to the community participation piece. So about 5 years ago, we started this effort called JCP.Next, which was really looking at the JCP in terms of how it's structured, what works, how the software development community has changed and evolved over time, and how we needed to change in order to adapt to that. So one of the first things that was clearly evident was the way that JSR expert groups operated. So it used to be when the JCP first started that JSRs operated in more of a closed way versus an open way. So you had the spec lead and the expert groups still, but their work was mostly private, and it was hard for the community to be able to provide feedback. The JCP was designed to incorporate that community feedback, but it was difficult for them for the community to add in their participation without being able to see all the work of the expert groups. So now, when you're working with JSR expert groups, transparency is a mandate. It's not an option. It's required that all JSRs do their work in the public, so that means that they have to have a public discussion forum and a public issue tracker and access to the downloads as they happen throughout the life cycle of the project. So that was our first step, which was a big step and an important step. But also, we used to have multiple executive committees. So it seems a little bit ridiculous at this point because it's really not necessary. You really only need one oversight board. It was a little bit complex and top-heavy. So we streamlined that by having one executive committee. And the third step, which we just completed last year in May 2016, was looking at how we can broaden our membership. So I talked to you about how we want to have all different types of developers participating in the JCP. There were clearly some barriers that were preventing that in the past. So our goal with this effort was to eliminate those barriers. So eliminate things like membership fees, employer signatures required for individuals, having to download and scan agreements. So now we have electronic signatures, no fees, no employer approval needed for individuals who want to join, and also adding some ways for individuals who want to contribute to be recognized. So adding contributor level participation for JSR expert groups, not just an expert group member. So now we have spec leads, expert group members, and contributors. Of course, it will take time before that rolls out and we see a large community of contributors on each JSR. But that's the goal, is that we enable a way for that recognition to happen. And also, of course, adding seats on the executive committee to represent those types of members. So in the end, what we did was, rather than have a one-size-fits-all membership as we had over the majority of the life cycle of the JCP, we have 3 different types of memberships for the different types of members that we have participating in the community. So an associate membership for the individuals who want to participate and contribute, and more like a contributor. So a simpler agreement, no employer signature required if you're employed. Partner members, so second type of membership for Java user groups, because of course we want Java user groups to participate, but the membership agreement we had didn't really make sense, since most Java user groups really are meetup groups versus a structured nonprofit legal entity. So Java user groups can now participate easily through a simple, lightweight agreement. And then, of course, we continue to have the full membership. We just used to call it a member. Now it's a full member. Full members can lead a JSR and be on the actual expert group of the JSR, and then serve and vote on the executive committee. So for those seats, and then of course we have seats for the associate members on the executive committee when we have our elections every year to decide who's going to be on the executive committee. So that was that last step of the third part of JCP.next, but we're still not done yet. So in 2017, we kicked off 3 more working groups. So we're still deciding, what will be the next thing, but there's 3 areas really that we've identified together within the executive committee, which is, first of all, we want to ensure that we enable the facilitation of the Open JDK project as well as the JCP. So obviously there might be some changes that we need to make as we move to that faster release cycle. So ensuring that we make those changes happen and enable that for the community. And as I mentioned earlier, the Java ME embedded vendors want to work on how to continue to move forward Java ME and evolve it. So there's a working group for those particular members. And then JCP.next. So how can we continue to be collaborative, and what are the things that could be improved in terms of efficiencies to make the work of the JSR expert groups more transparent to the community. And of course, all of these discussions are public as well. If you want to follow them along on jcp.org, you can find more detail about what we're working on, but that summarizes it. So in effect, the JCP is more open than it was before, but we continue to evolve and accept suggestions from the community in terms of how we want to change the JCP as an organization. So that completes that second part of my talk. The third part is, well, now how do we get the community to participate? The JCP is more open than it was before. We've enabled that transparency and broadened and eliminated the barriers that used to exist. No more barriers in terms of having heavyweight agreements, fees, or employer signatures required. But in the end, it still comes down to a little bit of inertia. So I took to the community, particularly the individual developers that are participating currently in the JCP as full members, participating on expert groups, and I talked to them about what is it that they've gained out of participating in the JCP. But because clearly developers have full-time jobs, they have family, they have personal lives, they have hobbies, so participating in the JCP as an individual developer is often a volunteer activity that you do in your after hours. So why would you want to do this? What are the things that you're gaining? And I listed the top 5, but I came up with adding number 6 because almost everyone I talked to told me that they were having fun doing all of these things and at the same time gaining these skills. So gaining the technical knowledge of what's coming next and learning about the technology. Secondly, gaining those soft skills that have become more and more critical to computer programmers. Even if you're in a highly technical role, more and more you're needing to do stand-ups and you're needed to communicate with teams that are working in other parts of the world than you are. So you're working on those skills like communication and collaboration and teamwork, and you're gaining that through these activities that you're participating in with JSR development. They've definitely gained visibility in the community, taking on, becoming experts in their field, both within their local community and the broader Java community globally. And they oftentimes will feel like they're making a difference in the technology that they're using every day, that they're making it better and creating those opportunities, both through being seen as a leader and gaining those technical skills, but also having that visibility in the community and being able to network and meet people that are outside the scope of your current role. So those are the reasons that currently developers are participating. There could be more. So you can do this as an individual, that's fine. But what we found is that it's better if you work together as part of a team. Working with your Java user group or with your employer, you can help each other and teach each other and work with each other. You achieve more together. And that's why we created the Adopt A JSR program, which really is a grassroots program that came out of the Java user groups themselves. So the two Java user groups that are on the executive committee, the London Java community in London, clearly, and SoJava in Brazil, got together and created this loosely called Adopt A JSR program. And it's not to be taken literally in that you're responsible for a JSR if you adopt a JSR, but it's a way for you to have a collective effort within your community and also to collaborate with other Java user groups. And what we found is it doesn't need to be just for your Java user group. You can adopt a JSR on your own. Sometimes people aren't able to commit the time to be working with their Java user group, so they work with developers at their company through a small informal group and participate via that way, and oftentimes even people have participated on their own as an individual. So although it is labeled and under the umbrella of Java user group, you can take these next steps that I've put forward in terms of Adopt A JSR and how you can help and contribute to something that you can do within your local company or just on your own if you want to. So the idea with this was, how is it that we can move beyond that inertia of, yes, the JCP is important, yes, standards are important, yes, it's important that everything's developed in the open, and we need that, and we want that, we require that, but how can we actually get people to start doing these things? Because also as part of this, I talk to the spec leads, and oftentimes spec leads aren't getting the kind of feedback that they would have expected when they're working on something so important. You would think that they're overwhelmed and inundated with feedback and comments, but most of the time that really isn't the case. So they're looking for more feedback. So how can we actually get people to do this? So we came up with a few steps, and the guidance of Adopt A JSR provides this. So it's a 5-step process. I think the first step that's really essential is that you pick a technology, right? As I mentioned, there's so many JSRs being developed, 400 at last count, including the 900 series JSRs. But at any given point in time, there really are only 15 to 20 that are actively being developed. So the first step is take a look at the active JSRs. I've just described most of them to you here in this talk. But they're focused primarily around the platforms, although that's not necessary. It used to be that most of the JSRs were not targeted to be part of a major platform release, like part of Java ME, part of Java SE, part of Java EE. Yes, they were targeted to be for that platform, but not necessarily included in it. So you still see a few JSRs that are that way. Like, for example, JSR 107 JCache is not part of an official platform, so it's standalone JSR. Also, MVC for Java is a standalone JSR. The desktop application API is a standalone JSR. But the majority of JSRs being developed through the JCP are now focused on a platform release, so either Java EE or Java SE. So pick one of these things to get started. That's the first step. So in a way you can do this if you're working with a group of people is just get together and informally talk, either in person or do a poll online. What are some of the things that the community is interested in? Is it more focused on the JVM, or is it on the server side, or is there some special interest? Like, for instance, we had Java Money last year complete its final release. So pick something that you can decide on together, and then once you pick it, you can go and find out a little bit more information about it. So every JSR will have its own page. As I mentioned, sometimes it's helpful to just remember it by the number, because oftentimes the names can get a little bit long. This screenshot I captured, date and time API, is not that way, but oftentimes, you can see them go on for a couple of lines actually. So go to the jcp.org site, enter the number in, and you'll come up with a page. Every JSR has a page, and what you can find here is contact information for the leader and the expert group members, as well as those links to the transparency information. So the public discussion link, where you can find out what's being discussed within the expert group, and also the public issue tracker. That's there, as well as downloads to the current drafts and the reference implementation early access builds. So the second step after you decide on what you're going to do is communication, and this is a really vital step, because in the very early stages of Adopt a JSR, oftentimes people would say, yes, I'm going to go adopt this JSR, and then they would go off and start developing something that they thought would be included in the JSR, and maybe submit it very late stages of the JSR as it went through the JSR development life cycle. So it's really essential, and it's almost like you feel like you shouldn't need to mention it, but communicate with the spec lead. So as soon as you decide you're interested in getting involved in this technology, go ahead and take to one of those forums, either the discussion forum or the issue tracker, and communicate your interest, that you're involved in this, and share what you have to contribute in terms of what your experience is and what some of your initial thoughts are on how you might participate. And these are just some of those thoughts on how you might want to participate. So ways to take action. And these are suggestions, and it should be agreed upon with the spec lead, like, hey, I'm thinking this would be a good thing I want to do. You can get specific, but these are kind of general suggestions. In the early days, sharing use cases on the list is a very common thing to do. Reading the specification, I know most developers don't do, but again, it doesn't have to be the entire specification. I can tell you I have read parts of specifications, but I've never read an entire specification of any of the JSRs. But you can pick a part so that applies to you and what you've used before, and be specific in your comments that you're commenting on this section of the specification or the Java doc. You can download the reference implementation once it gets to that stage, and comment on any bugs that exist, create new ones if there isn't an existing issue for whatever you find. One of the really cool things that groups of developers have done is have fun writing some sample applications. So that creates a little bit more of a hack day experience. I have a few examples to share with you right after I finish my 6 steps. You can actually write and share about the technology. So this is part of the adoption as well, in that you're sharing and growing the knowledge in your local community. So letting people know that this is coming. So whether that be an article or a blog or in social media, on Twitter, commenting that you're interested in this technology, this is the stage it's at, these are some of the things that you found helpful, that can really drive the adoption of the technology. And documentation, of course, is always something that's needed. But don't be limited by these ideas. These are some of the things that people have shared with me that they've contributed, and some of the things that spec leads have shared that they think will be useful to them as they complete their work. And of course, remember to actually contribute in these public forums. So try not to do your work in isolation. So actually contribute on either the issue tracker or the public discussion forums. So that's really important. Oftentimes I've had people go off and do hack days and never share it with anyone what they've done. So, and they might have some really useful feedback. So it's an essential step that you actually go ahead and provide your comments there. They are wanted and needed. And sharing on GitHub. We've created an Adopt a JSR GitHub organization. So in this way, if you decide you want to have a hack day, you can use these materials. There are hack day materials here. There are some workshop materials, some benchmarks, as well as some of those sample applications that I told you some of the user groups have developed. So you're free to use those and contribute back to those. And then the last step is to have fun. Organize your hack day, whether it's small or large. I shared this particular one here. This is a CDI. It's a CDI day, I think. So CDI at DevOps UK from last year. Yeah, last year. And again, it doesn't have to be a large group of people. This was 5 people. I jumped in. I was actually kind of overseeing. I wasn't actually participating in this. I was going to take the picture, but someone said, no, you must be in it. So in UK, Hack Day for CDI, sometimes they happen spontaneously like that. Sometimes they're organized. So Adopt A JSR, it's global groups of members working together. Again, it doesn't have to be your Java user group. You can gain attention in your local industry. You can become more professional in your efforts in terms of attracting more developers and focus your group as well. So I think Java user groups have changed as well over time. So it used to be that Java user groups only had a speaker. They came, they networked for a few minutes, they listened to the talk, and then they go away. But I think even the Java user groups are evolving to change and understanding that developers like to get together and work on something as well. So it's adapting and evolving the Java user group model as well to have, yes, you still want to have those speakers come in, but sometimes it's nice to offer another type of activity as well. So I'll share with you just a couple of examples of what some of the user groups have done that might inspire you, starting with the virtual Java user group. So again, this is great for people who aren't in a community where it's easy to get to local meetups for your Java user group. There's the virtual JUG, and we've organized several Java 9 hack days. So again, pick the thing you're going to do. With the virtual JUG, we kind of experimented with different JSRs, and we decided in this year to just focus on Java 9. So we've had several hack days, and those are recorded and available on YouTube. And what user groups can do, or even you can do it on your own, actually watch the recording. So in the recording, you'll learn about how to get ready for modularity and also a little bit more about JShell. So there are 2 recordings that we've already got available, and then there's 2 more planned in the future, so you can check those out. In Bucharest, they're focused on Java EE, so they've decided to adopt JSON-P, and they actually had a hack day where they created some demos, and they've contributed that to the Adopt A JSR organization. So you can use that if you wanted to focus on JSON. They're actually going to start getting involved in the Java 9 hack days that we'll continue to have up until the release of Java 9 planned for September. And Java user groups can also work together. So I told you this was CDI day. Bulgarian JUG had a CDI hack day with the spec lead, and that recording's available online. And so now that they've completed that activity, they can go ahead and share that with other Java user groups. So in Portugal, where I was last week, we talked about leveraging these materials that are now available and recorded so that other user groups can enjoy that experience. So the recording's available, and Ivan's willing to help out Roberto and Coimbra so that they can have a similar hack day in their local community around CDI, since that's a technology that they also are interested in. So it doesn't matter, you can't just say, oh, one JSR gets every JUG gets one JSR, and if it's taken already by a Java user group, you can't do anything with it. It's not the case at all. Multiple user groups working on the same technology is actually a good thing, getting different types of experiences. And we see this also with the Netherlands JUG and Chicago JUG, pairing them up. So working on the Security JSR, they also created some examples with JSR 375, and they're going to work together on a Java 9 hack day, Chicago JUG and the NL JUG. And in Paris, which France has been a country that I was trying to get involved in Adopt A JSR from the early days, but we finally had our first hack day in 2017, and I'm pleased to say it was a success, and they're planning to have another one. One of the user groups that was really successful with creating sample applications was the Belgium JUG. So they actually created a sample application for WebSocket, which was one of the new technologies into EE7. And again, as I mentioned, new technologies don't have those sample applications yet. So the Belgian JUG actually created a sample application as part of an Adopt A JSR hack day. It was a simple application, tic-tac-toe application demonstrating the client-server functionality of WebSocket, and we actually included that in the SDK for Java EE7. So that was, of course, very helpful input through Adopt A JSR. And of course, I have to include the initiators of the Adopt A JSR program. So in the London Java community, as I mentioned, important to pick something that your community is focused on. In London, they do have a very large and vibrant community, but it is predominantly focused on the JVM. So they're participating and driving a lot of those Java 9 hack days, both on their own as well as the ones that we're organizing with the virtual JUG. And in Brazil as well, they're focused more on the server side, but one of the initiators of the program, really active in evangelizing it to Java user groups and developers all over the world. They actually just completed a JUG USA tour, as I've been here in Europe, where they're going out and talking about the technology with user groups in the southeast part of the US. But what they do in Brazil is unique in that a lot of their activity is focused around evangelism, right? So sharing with the local community, with the students, with the developers in the meetups, as well as in the universities, and also sharing the information in translated form. So they prefer to have that documentation in Portuguese. So that also is something that Adopt A JSR groups can do if that's something that is desired in your community, translate into the local language. And in India as well, the Chennai JUG is participating in Java EE and trying out some of the new technologies and starting to develop some sample applications. So if you want to find out more about Java EE, another good place to go is the new GitHub organization. So that's Java EE. You can find links to the JSRs, the repositories, as well as the mailing lists. Those have recently migrated over from the java.net site. So this is now one place where you can go and find some of those great links if you want to get started on the Java EE technologies. If you, did you want to take a picture of that one? Okay, so great spot there. And then similarly for Java SE, if you want to get involved with Java SE, great place to start is OpenJDK. Driven through the Adopt A JSR program, they actually created a new group in OpenJDK. So there's now an adoption group in OpenJDK. So there's a list you can join there if you're interested more in the Java SE platform, as well as some wiki materials talking about which open source groups we've outreached to on the current release and providing some status of where those groups are in terms of the current release. And then also a little bit of guidance on migrating your applications. So once you download the early access build and try out your application against it, maybe some of the things that you might run into and a little bit of guidance in terms of things we've seen before, and then suggestions on where to report things if you're seeing something new that isn't being reported currently. So in summary, we really do need you to participate in the JCP activities, and a great place to start is jcp.org, either on the website or in social media. I encourage you to take a look at the membership and consider joining. As one of the current JCP members who joined over the last year said, joining the JCP is like becoming a Java citizen. So I encourage you to consider doing that. You can find out the links off of jcp.org. And also, I've left a few links for Adopt A JSR. If you want to find Adopt A JSR information, there's the GitHub organization. There's also Twitter, the mailing list, and there's an IRC channel as well that's monitored primarily through the London Java community. So thank you for your time here today. I hope this has been a helpful primer on the JCP and how to get involved and why you might want to get involved. I think I have a few more minutes for questions if anyone has questions in the audience. And if I don't have time to answer them here, you can always find me on Twitter. That's at HeatherVC. That's my personal Twitter. You can also ping me on the JCP Twitter handle as well. I'll respond to those. Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes. The best way to contact someone on Adopt A JSR? A spec lead? Okay. Uh-huh. Yes. Okay, yeah, the Adopt A JSR is the second part. So I would suggest the mailing list. So we've currently moved the mailing list for Adopt A JSR to a Google group. So it's adopt-a-JSR@googlegroups.com. So all of the Java user groups that are currently participating in Adopt A JSR are subscribed to that list. So you can send it there. I'm on that list, but you can also copy me. So that's part of my role, is kind of matching up the user groups with the spec lead. So I've tried to do that as much as possible, and that just kind of helps me be aware. I'm not by any means a bottleneck for it, but more just help to encourage them and connect other user groups if there's people that maybe can learn, like for instance with Bulgaria and Portugal, and yeah. So the best way to do that is use the mailing list. Go ahead and feel free to join the mailing list. It's not a heavy traffic mailing list either. So that's a great way to engage. And then also, most of the user group leaders that are participating in Adopt A JSR are pretty active on Twitter. So even like, I think I've sent out a couple of tweets around the bean validation JSR, right? We're talking about a couple of things that maybe were suggested in terms of maybe a sample application or something that could get started. So hashtag Adopt A JSR, put that out there, and ask for help. You can also tag me in that. I think between Twitter and the mailing list, that's probably the best way to engage the user groups if you have a task for them. And that's actually something that they really enjoy, is because there's that certain point where they're not really quite sure if they're bothering the spec lead by asking them what they should do. So an actual request of, I have this task, I need someone to do it, who can pick it up, is actually sometimes a way to move beyond that uncertainty time period. So. And again, even beyond final release, you can continue to do those kinds of activities to fix things or try out things or think about what you might want to do for a future release. So we try to encourage always that it's not over once the JSR hits final release. That's why I continue to do these talks, and even, in the years past final release, it's important. Okay. Okay. Great. So yeah, a great way place to start is on the mailing list for the Adopt A JSR group. And you can kind of hear what other people think as well, which is important, and then make a plan to move forward if you want to do something on your own. Well, thanks everybody for sticking it out through the last session of the conference. I've enjoyed the conference, although I've only been here half a day. I've enjoyed it very much. I appreciate you coming to my talk, and I've enjoyed chatting with many of you throughout the afternoon. All right.